Gorilla Mountain. Text by Jan McPherson. In 1963, a woman from San Francisco was travelling in the Virunga Mountains in Africa when she came face to face with a group of mountain gorillas. That woman's name was Diane Fossey, and her first encounter with the huge endangered apes was to change her life forever. Within 3 years, Diane was back in the Virunga Mountains studying mountain gorillas in the wild. She spent most of the next 18 years living in the mountains, observing and recording their behaviour. She learned how to recognise the gorillas as individuals. They got to know her and trust her. She dedicated her life to the gorillas and to protecting them from poachers, farmers, tourists, and from war. In 1985, Diane Fossey was killed, but by then she had become world famous and her work has been carried on by others. Today, there are more mountain gorillas living in the Virunga Mountains than there were when Diane Fossey died. Gorilla Mountain. Text by Jan McPherson.
Table of Contents. First glimpse, page 2. Writing about gorillas, page 7. Getting close, page 9. Spying on Diane, page 15. Different personalities, page 18. Fearsome silverback, page 22. Protecting the gorillas, page 26. Index, page 32. Text by Jan McPherson. Chapter 1. First Glimpse. In September 1963, a tall young American woman left her home in Kentucky and caught a plane to Nairobi, Kenya. Diane Fossey was on holiday. For the next 7 weeks, she would be travelling through East Africa, taking in the sights and smells and colours of a new continent. As she rode in a jeep across the Serengeti Plain, Diane heard tales of the mountain gorillas. These gigantic apes were said to be living high in the mountains of the Congo. They were of superhuman size and strength, yet incredibly gentle and shy. Few people had ever seen them. Diane was stirred by what people told her about the mountain gorillas. All her life she had been an animal lover. As a child, she had dreamed of becoming a vet. As she drove along with her guide, Diane could not stop thinking about the gorillas. All of a sudden, she came to a decision. "I'm going to see the gorillas," she said. Diane and her guide drove inland to the Virunga Mountains in the Congo. They left the jeep at the bottom of Mount Makino and began the steep 6-hour climb to the place where the gorillas lived. High up on the mountain, Diane met Joan and Alan Root, a young American couple who were making a wildlife film about the gorillas. They knew how to find these shy animals and agreed to take Diane deep into the rainforest to see them. The trail through the forest was covered with stinging nettles that pricked through Diane's clothes like burning needles. There was a tightness in her chest as the air grew thinner and thinner. Suddenly, from close by, there came a loud gorilla scream. Wah! Together with the thump-thump-thumping of the gorilla beating its chest, the party froze. Diane felt the hairs on the back of her neck lifting. The Virunga Mountains are in Central Africa.
This is the area in Central Africa where Diane
A silverback peers through dense foliage. Male gorillas start to grow silver-grey hair on their backs when they are about 13 years old. They waited till the screams and the echoes had died down, then crept forwards again. The guide took a machete and cut away leaves to make a window onto a small clearing. There, in the clearing, no more than a stone's throw away, was a group of gorillas. In the centre sat their leader, a huge adult male with silver-grey hair down his back. All around him were young gorillas, rolling and wrestling and tumbling on the ground. Diane lifted her binoculars. For a moment, she looked directly into the face of the great gorilla. She saw a huge brow over a broad, leathery face and kindly, intelligent eyes. Then something startled him. The gorilla rose. He gave another ear-splitting scream and another quick thump of the chest. All the young gorillas stopped playing. They looked around nervously, then quickly vanished into the trees. That was Diane Fossey's first glimpse of a mountain gorilla. Chapter 2. Writing about gorillas. Diane returned to America. She went back to her job in a children's hospital, working with disabled children. But she couldn't forget what she had seen that day in the misty mountains of Africa. She found out more about the mountain gorillas. They were being pushed out of their usual feeding areas by farmers who wanted more land for crops. To get away from the people, the gorillas went higher up into the mountains. It was wetter and colder there, and there was less food for them. Diane learned that there were only a few hundred gorillas left. Soon they would be extinct. She wrote a story about the gorillas and sent it, along with some photos, to the local newspaper. Her story was published. She wrote 2 more stories, and they were published too. 2 years passed. One day, Diane heard that a famous scientist called Dr. Richard Leakey was coming to town. Dr. Leakey was an anthropologist, a scientist who studies human beings and their ancestors. He was giving a public lecture on the subject of apes and other primates. Diane gathered up her articles and went to hear the lecture. When the lecture was over, she went up to Dr. Leakey and showed him her work. The scientist was struck by the enthusiastic young woman's concern for the gorillas. He told her that he too cared about the survival of the gorillas. He was trying to raise money to set up a research project. When he got the money, he would need someone to go and live in the African mountains and carry out field work. He asked Diane whether she would be interested in such work. Chapter 3. Getting Close. 3 years after her first trip to Africa, Diane again stood in the Congo looking up at the mountains. This time, however, she had not come as a tourist. This time, she was there to work. First, she needed to learn tracking skills so she could find the gorillas as they wandered through the mountains. Her teacher was Alan Root, the filmmaker who had helped her to see a gorilla for the very first time. Alan led her through the forest, showing her how to look out for footprints and knuckle prints pressed into the mud. These prints, together with fresh gorilla droppings, were a sign that gorillas had passed that way just a short time before. At last, Diane spotted footprints a little way ahead. She ran excitedly off down the path, then stopped. Alan was not following her. Diane retraced her steps. Alan was sitting patiently, waiting in the spot she had left him a short time before. "You were going the wrong way," he told her. "Look." He pointed to a line of broken twigs and leaves. all along the edge of the path. The leaves had been torn off and chewed by the gorillas as they wandered through the forest. The snapped-off leaves and stems pointed the way the gorillas were heading, and that was in the opposite direction. "If you are ever going to find any gorillas to study," said Alan with a twinkle, "you must follow their tracks to where they are going, not backtrack to places they've already been." The next day, Alan left. Diane practiced and learned. As the weeks passed, she became more confident about going out into the forest. Sometimes she went alone. Sometimes she went with Sanwekwe, a tracker from a village further down the mountain. Diane's goal was to get close enough to watch the gorillas and see how they behaved in their family groups. At first, when she came upon a group of gorillas, she hid behind bushes. She wrapped vines around the big glass eyes of her binoculars. She tried to watch without being seen. A silverback sits with a gorilla mother and baby.
Here is a baby gorilla. It wants to stay close to its mother.
It didn't work. Each gorilla group had a young male who acted as a sentry. He stood at the edge of the group, keeping watch. As soon as he saw her, or heard her, he gave the alarm and the group would flee. One day, Diane tried a different tactic. She had come upon some gorillas eating wild celery on the edge of the forest. They were picking the stalks and munching them. As they munched, the gorillas let out loud burps and grunts, the sounds gorillas make when they are happily feeding. At first, Diane watched from a distance. Then she stood up and copied the gorillas. She reached out and snapped off a long stick of celery. She held it to her mouth and pretended to eat. "Erp," said Diane. "Erp, burp," she said, munching and belching. That day she made no attempt to get closer to the gorillas. However, for the first time, the gorillas stayed where they were, instead of running away. Diane pretends to eat leaves, so as not to frighten away a gorilla. After that, Diane went out every day and copied the behaviour of the gorillas. She walked down low, dragging her knuckles along the ground as the gorillas did. She lay down and pretended to sleep when they did. She made the same noises as they did and imitated their actions. Bit by bit, the gorillas on the mountain grew used to her. They began to accept this munching, belching gorilla person who was following them around. Diane lies down to show the gorilla that she means no harm. Chapter 4. Spying on Diane. Another breakthrough in Diane's fieldwork happened quite by chance. A group of 16 gorillas was out enjoying the sun. The gorillas were resting and sunbathing on a hillside across a small ravine. Diane thought she might get a better view if she climbed a tree. She went to a nearby tree and grabbed hold of the trunk. She gripped the bottom of the trunk between her feet and pushed herself up, then slid down to the bottom again. She tried again, pushing harder. Again, she went partway up, then came sliding down again. Sanwekwe came and helped her with a shove. By now, both of them were shrieking with laughter. "That's the end of my gorillas," thought Diane as she struggled up the tree. "With all this noise, they'll have run away in fright." Diane gets a better view of the gorillas from up in a tree. But when she got to the top of the tree and looked down, she found the gorillas hadn't run away. They had come closer. 16 gorillas had come forward to the edge of the ravine and were standing in a row watching her. It was as if the gorillas were spectators at a circus, and she was the circus clown. In a flash, Diane learned something else about gorillas. She learned that gorillas, like people, are full of curiosity. From now on, she would use this curiosity in her fieldwork. She would keep doing things that interested the gorillas. She would let them spy on her. A curious silverback looks up at Diane.
Here is a silverback gorilla. He weighs about 230 kilograms.
Chapter 5. Different Personalities. Returning from the forest one afternoon, Diane found soldiers at the camp. They were taking her belongings and throwing them out of the cabin. "There is a war on in our country now," the soldiers told her. "You must leave. We don't want you here anymore." Diane was marched out of the camp and back down the mountain. She was told she could never return. She went to stay with friends in Uganda, a country across the border from the Congo. Her friends told her plainly what she must do. "This area is too dangerous for a woman working alone," they said. "Leave the gorillas and go home." Diane listened politely to her friends' advice, then made up her own mind what to do. The range of mountains where the gorillas lived was bounded on 3 sides by 3 different countries: the Congo, Uganda, and Rwanda. As she studied the map, Diane had an idea. If she moved camp to Rwanda, she might be able to find another way up into the mountains. She would still be working with the mountain gorillas, but reaching them from the other side. Diane types up her notes in her mountain cabin. Diane was given permission to set up a research centre in the tiny country of Rwanda. Once more, she and a line of helpers walked up the mountain carrying tents and equipment. Once more, the work of learning about the gorillas began. Diane discovered 9 gorilla groups living on the Rwandan side of the mountains. The groups contained 80 gorillas. Over the next few years, Diane came to know each one. She found that gorillas, like people, had strikingly different personalities. There was the show-off, the quiet one, the daredevil, and the clown. In other ways too, gorillas were like humans. They smiled, they frowned, they sulked, they threw tantrums. Young gorillas loved to wrestle and to toss fruit around like a ball. Older gorillas treated others in the family with affection. They put their arms around one another and looked deep into each other's eyes. One group, which Diane labelled Group 4, was a family of 12 gorillas. Diane studied Group 4 over a very long time. She noticed a 5-year-old gorilla in the group who was often alone, perhaps because he was lonely. This young male showed much more interest in Diane's visits than the others in his group did. Diane noticed that he had an oddly twisted finger and named him Digit. Sometimes, during Diane's daily visits, Digit would leave the others and come to sit beside her. He would watch as she made notes or drawings in her notebook. One day, to Diane's surprise, Digit reached out and gently picked up the notebook. He looked at it and sniffed. Then he picked up her pencil and her glove and did the same. Finally, Digit laid everything down again, yawned, and closed his eyes. In a minute, Diane heard the sound of the gorilla's quiet breathing as he lay on the ground beside her. asleep in the midday sun. Chapter 6. Fearsome Silverback. Gorillas, Diane knew, are the largest of all the great apes and the most feared. A full-grown male may have an arm span of over 3 meters. When upright, he may stand 2 meters tall. He may weigh 180 kilograms, the weight of 2 men. When a gorilla gets angry and charges, it is like being in the path of a runaway truck. The enemy is run down, rolled over and over, then ripped with the gorilla's sharp teeth. Diane knew that. She knew, too, that the Africans in the villages further down the mountain were terrified of the gorillas. Yet, watching them in their daily life, Diane became convinced that most of the time they were gentle giants. She read a book by a scientist who shared that view. The scientist said that when a gorilla charges a human, it is nearly always a bluff. The best thing to do is to stand still and face the gorilla. The worst thing to do is to turn and run away. One day, alone on the mountain, Diane walked straight into the path of a silverback gorilla. The gorilla rose up, startled. The hairs on his head stood out. His eyes gleamed yellow. A strange smell came from his body, the smell of fear. Then he charged. Roaring, screaming and beating his chest, the great gorilla came at her. Behind him came 4 others, all crashing towards her down the track. Every instinct in Diane's body told her to run. At the same time, another voice was talking inside her head. "Stay calm," said the voice. "Stand your ground. This is only a bluff." On came the gorillas, thundering down the slope. Now the leading gorilla was only meters from her, now just an arm's length away. Suddenly, he stopped. All the others following behind slammed into him. Diane dropped to the ground and lay at the huge gorilla's feet. Minutes ticked by. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Still, she lay on the ground, motionless. She dared not look up. She dared not move. She dared not challenge the gorilla in any way. From way down in the valley, she heard the sound of voices. African farmers had heard the screaming gorillas. They were out searching for her, calling her name. The leading gorilla heard the sound of voices too. Abruptly, he turned to the others. He grunted and thumped his chest. Together they moved away. When the searchers arrived, they found Diane sitting on the track. She was pale and trembling, but unharmed. "We heard the charge. We came looking for your body," said the men. They gazed down at her, shaking their heads in disbelief. "It must be a miracle," they said. A young male gorilla challenges an intruder. Chapter 7. Protecting the Gorillas. An infant gorilla was brought to the research center in a box. The 3-year-old gorilla was terrified and close to death. For weeks she had been locked in a cage down at the park headquarters. She had seen no other gorillas in that time. She had seen no trees. She had seen no sky. Diane stared down in horror at the small gorilla curled inside the box. What could have caused this? Slowly the truth came out. The gorilla had been captured by hunters. The hunters had gone into the park looking for young female gorillas. The females were to be sold to a foreign country and put into zoos. But the parents of this gorilla had fought back, trying to save her. So the hunters had killed them and other adults in the group as well. In all, 6 gorillas had been killed so that the hunters could capture this one small orphan. Now the orphan lay weak and ill. At once the orphan was taken into the research center for nursing. Diane gave orders for her own small cabin to be turned into a hospital. But this was no ordinary hospital. This was like a rainforest, filled with leaves and berries and vines. Once the room was prepared, the little gorilla was carried inside. She was taken out of the box and placed in a nest of green leaves. Weakly, she pulled herself out of the nest and struggled over to the window. She climbed up to the mesh-covered glass and looked out at the hills beyond. Then, as the orphaned gorilla gazed out at the hills and peaks of her old home, Diane saw the small body suddenly bend and shake with sobs. She saw something else, too, something she had not seen before, and would never see again. The small gorilla was crying. Diane with Coco and Pucka, two gorilla orphans.
The 3-year-old gorilla is eating leaves from a tree.
Real tears were running down her cheeks and splashing onto the floor. Years passed and Diane's work among the gorillas went on. The research centre grew bigger. Diane was becoming famous. Scientists, students and filmmakers came from all parts of the world to talk with her and learn about her work. From time to time, Diane went away. She travelled to England and studied anthropology. She went to America and gave lectures about her work. Yet she always came back gladly to Rwanda and her cabin in the mountains. The cabin was her home and the gorillas were her children, her family. Then one day her gorilla friend, Digit, died. His body was found lying on a hillside. He had been killed by poachers who were illegally hunting animals in the national park for food. Diane threw herself even harder into the task of protecting the gorillas. She set up patrols to cover the mountain. The patrols went out each day looking for hunters and poachers and traps. Diane's dream was for the park to be a sanctuary for mountain gorillas. She wanted it to be a place where they could roam freely and be safe. As time went by, Diane became more and more obsessed with the safety of the gorillas. She grew angry with hunters and poachers. She grew angry with park officials. She even grew angry with the Rwandan farmers who took their cattle up the mountain to graze. These Rwandan farmers were some of the poorest people in all of Africa. They needed the cattle to feed their hungry families. But by now, only one thing mattered to Diane: saving the gorillas she loved. In the last few years of her life, Diane Fossey grew lonely and bitter. Friends warned her to be careful. She was making too many enemies. Diane would not listen. On the 27th of December, 1985, at 5:45 in the morning, a cry went up from the little cabin in the research centre. Diane Fossey was dead. Someone had broken into her cabin and killed her during the night. No one knows who killed Diane Fossey and ended her years of working among the mountain gorillas. What is known, though, is that in her life and work she was a true pioneer. In her 18 years of living in Africa and observing the mountain gorillas, she came to love and understand them as no one else had done. She fought for them, and she helped them to survive. Diane with the mountain apes she loved.
Make a newspaper front page about the story, or make your own newspaper front page. Make your own picture. Click on Help to watch a demonstration. Complete your ID by typing in your name. Click Next when you have finished. Set a date. Choose the month. Choose the day. Great, that's today's date. Type in a name for your newspaper. Click on a headline for your story. Diane Fossey saves gorillas. Type your story. Write some sentences about the most interesting part of the book. Drag a picture for your story onto the newspaper front page. Click Next when you've finished. You be the reporter. Click Create. Make your own picture. Click on Help to watch a demonstration. Complete your ID by typing in your
Story Toolbox. Type your name and click Next. Create a new story. Have fun clicking on the buttons. Then drag items onto the board to make a picture. Type or write your story underneath the picture. Click Next to make another page or click Finish to view your story. Fantastic work! Click Save to save your story, click Print to print your story, or click Start Again to make another story.